Trump's policy of separating families at the border involved these Trump officials you don't even know. Jacob Soboroff has the answers next. Like, subscribe, and share with your friends and family.
Thom Hartmann Program. On the line with us, Jacob Soboroff, the correspondent with NBC and MSNBC News and author of the new book, Separated, Inside an American Tragedy. If you want to know what's really going on at our border, what's really going on with this administration's policies, how they came about, how they're being executed, you need to get this book, Separated. It's brilliant. JacobSoboroff.com is his website and also his Twitter handle. Jacob, welcome back to the program. I understand that Trump cabinet officials actually, Stephen Miller, who is not a member of the cabinet, forced the cabinet officials basically to say, yes, tear families apart?
Hey, Tom, it's good to be back with you. Yeah, this is from some new exclusive reporting. Julia Ainsley, my colleague, and I dropped at the end of last week, and you got it exactly correct. In a 2018 meeting in the White House Situation Room, Trump cabinet officials, and I'm talking about people that we have not heretofore associated with the family separation policy, people like Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, John Bolton, who at the time was in the administration, of course, Don McGahn, who was the White House counsel at the time, Mark Short, who's today the Chief of Staff to the Vice President. All of these guys, including Alex Azar and, of course, Secretary Nielsen, AG Sessions, they were invited to participate in this immigration session that was basically led by Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller was extraordinarily frustrated that they weren't moving forward quickly enough with separating families, something that he wanted to do, obviously, and ultimately, traumatized for life over 5,400 children, accused those in the room who didn't want to move forward with the policy of being un-American, asked for a show of hands vote. Kirstjen Nielsen kept her hands down, basically insisting that they weren't ready to do it yet, even though she ultimately signed the policy into place. And the rest was history, Tom. They all raised their hands in a sea of hands, according to two sources we spoke to that were in the room. And they moved forward with this policy that was a humanitarian catastrophe, as we all know.
Jacob, tell us about how these children reacted to being torn away from their parents. What did you personally see?
Well, as we talked about when I spoke to you last, I'll never forget it for the rest of my life. The one of the key players involved in the reunifications, when I spoke to him for my book, told me it was the greatest humanitarian catastrophe of his lifetime when it came to domestic U.S. affairs. The American Academy of Pediatrics calls this government-sanctioned child abuse, what the kids went through. Physicians for Human Rights calls it torture, what the U.S. government did to the children. And to this day, when I talk to Juan and Jose, the son and father, who I wrote about in my book, they say to me they had psychological trauma. And they asked me if I ever ran into President Trump to ask Trump why he did this to them. And that's why the U.S. government now is on the hook for paying for the mental health services for all of the families that were taken away from each other as a direct result of this policy. It will damage these children for the rest of their lives.
You put this in the past tense, Jacob, but I understand that thousands of children are still separated from their families, and that I read a piece last week. In fact, I read it on the air. I trust your reporting, perhaps a little more than this source. It suggested that there were over 1,000 children that we still just have no idea what happened to them because the Trump administration did their policies so quickly that the kids were lost track of. And they may well have been, God only knows, sold into slavery. We just don't know. What kind of numbers are there, and what's the current status of these kids?
Well, the 1,000 number that you're referring to, I believe, is the 1,000 children that were separated before the zero tolerance policy was officially started. And to be really clear, there were children on a limited basis that were separated during the Obama administration as well, never on a scale of what the Trump administration effectuated. And in fact, they had pushed for this during the Obama administration and didn't get to this point. But the kids that were separated before zero tolerance were effectively lost in a system of information technology of the federal government that didn't speak to in between different agencies, HHS, ICE, Border Patrol, CBP. Their back end didn't talk to each other. So when the children were taken away from the parents, they weren't connected to each other in any government system. So to this day, that group of over 1,000 separated before zero tolerance, the government is trying by court order with the ACLU, with NGOs, to track them down on the ground in Central America to figure out if indeed they were separated, if indeed they were ever reunited, and ultimately what happened to them. And the reality is we just can't say. Because of coronavirus, some of those efforts have slowed down. The door-to-door, door knocking or phone calls to find the unreachables, as Vice put it in a great report about this. And so we just don't know. We just don't know. And so the trauma is compounded every day. As you said, it's not a past tense situation. It's a present tense situation that continues to unfold. And that, by the way, Tom, that's why you have to remain vigilant about this. Stephen Miller wanted to separate tens of thousands of more children than were ultimately separated. In 2018 alone, it would have been 100,000 more kids if his version of the plan ultimately went through. And I know from my reporting in the book that Donald Trump wanted to reinstate this policy on multiple occasions. He brought it up with Kirstjen Nielsen, and there's a specific story in the epilogue of the book.
Yeah, we're talking with Jacob Soboroff. His book, Separated, Inside an American Tragedy, about this war crime is the wrong word, but prosecutable, in my opinion. I mean, this is just extraordinary. Just for the record, Jacob, you mentioned that children had been separated from their families under the Obama administration. My understanding is 100% of the time that was done because they believed that the adult that the child was with was either A, not actually that child's parent, that these children were being trafficked, or B, was an abusive parent. Do I have that right?
I think for the most part that is true. But what I'll say is, under the law, children arrived with people who were not their biological parent or legal guardian were separated from aunts and uncles and other relatives. Not always, not across the board, but it definitely happened. And the NGOs that are fighting today against the Trump administration fought against the Obama administration about that. And it goes without saying that the Obama administration does not have a lot of fans in the immigration rights, immigration activism community, and that's because the Obama administration, just like the Bush administration before that, and just like the Clinton administration before that, practiced aggressive deterrence-based immigration policies, including deporting more people than any other administration ever, which, of course, was a different type of family separation. That does not mean that what the Trump administration did isn't far and away much worse, much more of a humanitarian catastrophe, much more of, some people say a crime against humanity, what they did to all of these children. But the Trump administration wouldn't have been able to do what they ultimately did if it wasn't for decades of failed border policies of both Democrats and Republicans. And I think that that's something that we all need to understand if we're going to move forward, whether it's in a Biden administration or in a Trump administration.
Yeah, it's an important lesson. We have just a minute to a hard break, Jacob. Back early on this, I mean, your reporting really broke a lot of this wide open. And I remember reading a news story suggesting that a chain of children's homes or foster care facilities associated with Betsy DeVos had been fast-tracked to get a lot of these kids. Do you know anything about that?
I don't. I mean, I've heard a lot about that as well, and I did see a lot of that type of stuff going around online. For what I know, from what I saw, these children went into the custody of Health and Human Services, thousands of them. It sent the system into a crisis, overflowing with children. But I think that it wasn't something that frankly crossed my radar in a way that we felt met the standards of NBC News, and that's just the truth.
Right. Okay, well, that's good to know or not know or whatever it may be. Jacob, thanks so much for dropping by today. Really great talking with you.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Tom. Thanks.
Thank you. Jacob Soboroff, correspondent with NBC News, MSNBC, author of a new book, which is an extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary book, Separated, Inside an American Tragedy.